of the Rockies, Colorado is rich in coal, and the story of the miners of Colorado should be told.
My name is William Henry Lloyd, and I'm 84 years old, going 85. I was born in 1893 in England.
Well, there was a lot of hardship and everything. They was broke. A miner never could save anything.
But if you take it step by step, it's been really a rough go. We've had some very, very lean years. Very lean years.
Colorado, it was a poor place to raise a family in the 1910s, and the miners of Colorado were poor, hard-working men.
Coal miners lived a hard life, a very hard life. They played hard. Everything pertaining to their lives was hard.
They would have dances and things like that, and you'd have places to go to. And well, of course, it isn't like now. The mines is all shut down. There's nothing here but just old people.
Just old people. But where there are old people, there are memories. And through these memories run the veins of the American past, like seams of coal winding deep in the rock of the earth. In this broadcast, you'll meet some people who helped to build America by putting the pick to that rock and freeing its treasure for the industrial expansion of the 20th century. This is their story. It's the story of struggle. They had to wrest their livelihood from the stubborn earth and their rights from men even more obstinate. I'm Bill Moyers.
In keeping with Chevron's tradition of service throughout the 20th century, the people of Chevron bring you this program in support of public television.
Our story takes place in that part of the Old West where the Rockies meet the prairies in southern Colorado. If you don't live there, and not many of us do, your idea of that country was perhaps forged as mine was by the tales of Kit Carson and Jim Bridger and cowboys and Indians of Hollywood. It was the wild, wild West. Pat Masterson was the sheriff of Trinidad, the biggest town around. Farmers fought cattlemen, cattlemen fought sheep herders, and there were shootouts just like those in the movies. But there was in those parts another way of life that doesn't fit the romanticized images of the Old West. I mean the life of the coal miner. Few people remember that by the turn of the century, Colorado was one of the most important coal-producing states in the Union. The first mine had opened just after the Civil War, and when the railroad arrived in 1879, Trinidad became a boom town. There was a shortage of labor in those vast spaces, so thousands of newcomers flocked in to do the work. Many of them were immigrants. They came directly from the old world to this remote corner of the new, where the shimmering dreams of El Dorado, gold and Demdar Hills, Pikes Peak or bust, had given way to the dark shafts through which men and mules brought forth coal to feed the growing appetite of industrialization. They drilled the rock face with a breast auger like that one, and then filled the hole with explosives. They used the pick to extract the coal, and their days were numbered, literally. When the miner had filled the coal car, he put his number on it so that the check weighman outside could measure the fruits of his labor and record it. His total determined his pay. Number 5, number 30, number 47, and so on. These were the coin of their lives. The numbers remain, the miners are gone. The boom towns went bust. But although the mines are gone, we have the memories of the miners and their families. The University of Colorado recently set out to record an oral history of these men and women, and we've worked with the university, with Eric Margolis and his colleagues, to bring you their story. Listen carefully. The events happened early in our century. Our narrators are old. Their many different accents testify to the multitudinous making of America.
On June the 3rd, I graduated out of the 8th grade. On June the 6th, my mother had my lunch pail ready to go work in the mine.
I started in the mining business, not in the business itself, as a miner at the age of 13. Actually, I was so young, I was afraid of the dark.
Come all you young people, so young and so fine. Seek not your fortune in the dark, dreary mine. It'll form as a habit and seep in your soul till the blood of your body runs black as the coal. For it's dark as a dungeon and damp as the dew, where the dangers are double and the pleasures are few, where the rain never falls and the sun never shines. It's dark as a dungeon way down in the mine.
I like to look back and think of the families and the type, quality of people. We had all nationalities, I think, up there, except probably Eskimos. We had many from, Europe, Italian, Slav, and people, first and second generation people from Europe working in the mines.
When we come in this country, me and my mother and my sister, we come in to New York, and we were staying at Ellis Island, where there is. Over there, we stay there 1 month till we get a permission to proceed.
Oh my gosh, they had the Dickens at the time. I think it took over a month on that ship. It was a long, long, miserable ride. They was glad to land, that's all. They was happy when they finally got off of them boats.
There was agencies then, and if you wanted to come, you'd write to these fellows, and they'd make all the arrangements for you and bring you here, and they'd have a job for you. Because I was talking to my father one time, and I said, how come you passed all these big cities and you come to Price? He says, because I come COD. That's my destination. He said, when I got on, I had to stop in Price. This fellow had made all the arrangements, sent him his ticket to come out. Then they come out and get a job and work so long, pay him off, and then they were on their own.
A large percentage of the people that came from Europe really came here because they had daughters or sisters. They came over here to work to get enough money for a dowry. They just didn't have enough money. That's the reason they came. They were going to work a year or two and go back. And of course they stayed. A lot of them wound up in the cemeteries.
These mines was all just getting started then. They was just opening up, and there was a lot of work. They was building the camps and railroads and mines, and so they start sending for each other, and they worked their way up to Colorado.
My dad used to tell me that he worked in Austria as a starvation somewhere, But when he came here, he was a foreigner, couldn't talk English, so they let him go with somebody that couldn't talk very much either, When he went to get his pay, he didn't know what that was getting paid for, how much he was supposed to receive, right? So they beat him neck and necktie. That's the way it was them days. And where we lived there at Sunlight, you built your own log cabin and you paid rent on the goddamn thing. I like that.
My dad could get more money in England before he left here than he could when he got here. Didn't have to live in the same old kind of shacks they had here either. Didn't have to put up with all the guff. If you looked the wrong way, down the canyon for you.
Of course, you've got to understand, in those days,
foreigners weren't accepted, especially the Greeks and the Italians, the goddamn Greeks and the dirty Dagos.
Yep.
They were not accepted. You didn't dare step out of line to talk to, you know, you weren't even classified as being white.
And here's another thing. These guys would come over from England, didn't have a citizenship papers, they'd make more money, they lived in the best houses, and had the best conditions. Because they could defend themselves. My dad couldn't defend himself because he didn't know the English language. My grandfather couldn't defend himself.
Whatever dreams of a new life drove them here, the immigrants soon found they were part of a system that resembled the feudalism of medieval Europe, trapped like vassals and hostage to the lord of the manor. Only this was industrial feudalism. To mine coal in such isolated areas, the big companies like Colorado Fuel and Iron had to build their own towns. They expected to make a profit on the capital invested in the mines, and profits as well from the housing and services they provided the workers. Immigrants arriving with little except the clothes on their backs had to buy their tools, rent a place to live, and put food on the table for their families. The only place to buy anything was the company store.
Everything in these canyons was company. There was the company store, the company-sponsored band, the company minister. Everything was paid for and owned by the company.
When I started in, it was pretty damn rough, I'll tell you. And then when we used to trade at the company store, well, you had to eat. Statement day, sometimes you got $1, $1.50, sometimes you got a snake. And that happened many a times.
What?
A snake, nothing coming. The company kept it all.
Why'd you call it a snake?
Because they just put a little line like that. Just like that, you know, right on. It says balance, or, you know, what you're supposed to get. Because they take your car by it, you take your powder, they take your grocery, what you bought. Everything came out of there in the statement. Lights and all and everything. House rent. Everything if you rented a house. They take everything before you see your statement.
The first paycheck I got in 1916 was scrip. You know, a 5-cent piece looked like a $5 bill. See? The bigger the denominations, the smaller the bill.
When my father got paid, he got paid in scrip because he was not supposed to buy out of the camp. So he would get what we could get there at the company store, and they could charge you whatever they wanted, and you were always in the red with them.
Everything was cheap, yes. You could get a pound of bacon for 15, 20 cents. Beans, 10 cents a pound. But you didn't have the 10 cents for 25 cents to get the stuff. You didn't have the money.
We've had some very, very lean years. I remember when we were kids, we ate potatoes and macaroni, and the only eggs we ate, we got out of a chicken coop, and we had a cow we milked.
We ate spaghetti pretty near every night because you had to like it. And the only meat we saw when they go down and catch a jackrabbit or something like that.
Coal miners lived a hard life, a very hard life. They played hard. Everything pertaining to their lives was hard. And it took some mighty brave women to have lived with it, through it all. And I have marveled at my grandmother. When she came across the United States from Pennsylvania to Walsenburg with a little tiny baby in her arms, she didn't know what she was coming to. The coal miners, as a rule, all had big families. The family of 5 was a small family. I've heard of families of 12 and 15 children. The women washed clothes on the washboard. They baked all their own bread. They did their canning, did all the cooking, the sewing.
When I look back and see how those women could raise those kids and do those housework, I can't see how they did it. I don't see how they could not go bugs. Washing clothes by hand on the board, you know. Go haul the water, go haul over the buckets and see. No hydrants, no water in the house, no two-seater can out there and all that kind of stuff. So I don't see how they did it.
The girls just as soon as they were able to take care of a baby, were kept home. They didn't get to go to school very much. The girls could help Mama wash the clothes. And of course, just as soon as the girls would reach an age where they could get away from home, they would go into the boarding houses to work. And I know a woman that worked for $1.25 a week as a girl. She worked for that until she was married. There was no child labor laws in those days, and the boys were taken into the mine, 11, 12, 13 years old.
The present-day miner wouldn't recognize what it was like. We were pick miners. We used picks. There were no machines, and we blasted our coal. We'd undercut it or side cut it, and then blast it and load it. With that, we had to lay our own track, do our own drilling, set our own props.
You done your own drilling, you drilled your own holes with a breast auger. This is all hand muscle work.
And there was none of this here stuff like nowadays, electric primers and all that crap, you know. You shot with a squib, a needle. You put the needle in your powder, see, back in the hole, a long copper needle. And then you took and wet some slack and threw it in with your hand and tamp it with a tamping bar. Well, then you laid your squib in the hole and lit it with a carbide light and took off.
Sometimes you got away far enough, and sometimes you didn't. Sometimes
got sprinkled a little.
If it went off, what you done, you just fell down and covered your face up like this, and that coal would hit you in the back and the rear end and everywhere else, you know.
A lot of miners don't know what a squib is, because that was about the oldest style of shooting with a squib. These are like a firecracker. We put them in a hole here, and that's what set the powder off. You see here, we'd bend this tail down like this and put it in the front of the hole like this, and they get the carbide lamp and light it like that, and this thing take off and go blast the powder. And that was black powder. And we had to work in all that smoke and everything and dust, and you couldn't see in front of you. But we worked anyhow, and that's why we got it done.
Well, I got up one morning, the sun didn't shine. I picked up my shovel and I went to the mine. I loaded 16 ton of that number 4 coal. The face boss said, well, bless my soul, the 16 ton. What do I get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, for I can't go, cause I owe my soul to the company store.
I was one of the smallest drivers in the whole mine, and I had the biggest mule in the mine, Sam Mule. It was a beautiful thing. I had a steep place to pull out of, and I had to have a good big strong man. I had the biggest mule in the mine. They kept them in there all the time. They had a big stable with lights and everything in there. We harnessed them and unharnessed them, and they stayed in there all the time. There was one mule named Jack. He used to come there where we'd eat lunch, and he'd eat all the sandwiches, bananas, everything we gave him. They was just beautiful. There was some mean ones. We drivers wore these around our necks like that. And if the mule, needed whipping, well, they sure got it. And I could pop. Some of us could hit a grasshopper from here to over there with a popper, you know, like that. See, and they were old style. And they made us quit using these after. They wouldn't let us. It was inhumane. And so they made us quit using it. All we could use was this fag. That's all they'd let us use on the mule's end. But some of the drivers lose their patience, and they beat them over the head even with these things. We used to have balking mules. They'd balk. They refused to work. They was unionized before some of us. We drivers have maybe 6 or 10 men, and we had to keep up our turn, you know, and maybe beat our miners out of a car, too. That meant a lot. And so having this old balky mule and make me fall behind with the turn with the men. And so, by jingo, I just lose my patience sometimes, and I really beat up. And she just stall there and bite around and everything. All at once she'd take off, and I'd have to jump on the car and catch her. And oh, it was terrible. Those balky mules was awful. Worse than any balky woman you ever saw.
My sweetheart's the mule of the mines. I drive her without any lines. On the bumper I sit, and I chew and I spit all over my sweetheart's behind.
If a mule was accidentally killed,
oh, you got hell.
you got hell, and they closed that end of the mine down.
Let a man get hurt, they say, oh, well, they'll hire another Mexican.
That's right.
That's just the way it happens, fellas.
There was no respect given at all.
The men worked long hours. They were underpaid. They lived in closed camps. They had no personal freedom. They couldn't vote as they pleased. They were captives, literally captives in the coal camps in these canyons. They were cheated at the weigh scales. They were cheated on what they loaded underground. They were cheated on dead work that they had to pay for the dead work themselves. And conditions were generally abominable.
I recall when I was working underground, 10 hours at the face. You walked in on your own time, or you went in on your own time. You ate lunch on your own time, came out on your own time.
We had to do all the dead work. Pick the bony and rock and keep the coal clean. If substantial amount of rock or bone was shown up in coal, now you were docked. They docked you.
If your car went out and they found a chunk of rock all big as a silver dollar around and that thick, the first time they fined you 50 cents. They had a bucket. They'd put your check number on there, and they'd put this rock in that bucket. The second time, if they found any rock in your coal like that, they charged you $1. The third time, put your tools on the car, you're through. You cleaned that coal for nothing, for nothing.
You had no recourse. The company weighed the coal. We didn't know how much it weighed. We didn't have a check weighman. I think there was an antique law that said you were entitled to a check weighman, but God help you, you tried to get one because you didn't have any union to represent you.
When that car hit the scales, say it went 5,000 pounds, right? Well, they'd give you 4,800. Or if it went 5,200, they'd give you 5. Until the miners got their own check weighman. See, they used to pay for their damn operating of the mine off of the sweat of the miner.
Right. You've been docked and docked again, boy. You've been loading 2 for 1. What have you to show for working since this mining has begun? Watch the rocks, they're falling daily. Careless miners always fail. Keep your hand upon the dollar and your eye upon the scale.
All of these mines were gaseous and dangerous. And they had a great many explosions. Many, many, many hundreds of miners were killed in this field over the course of its life.
Well, there was 2 killed in Moine Carbo while I was there. One was a timberman, and the other one's a nipper, see? This timberman had no business getting killed. See, he went in and pulled the timber out of the place, you see, and standing around watching it like a big dummy, you know. And when the darn place started to come in, then he started to run. And a big rock come down the crosscut there and slid across and hit him on the side of the head and broke his neck. See, and as he went to turn, see, it hit him that, you know, when he went to turn with that force, you see, it broke his neck. Before he died, he had a chew tobacco in his mouth, and the fellows was right there, and he said, "Take this chew tobacco out of my mouth." So they took the chew tobacco out of his mouth, and that was it. See?
And all at once there was a roar, and there was what they call a chimney of this soapstone formed right over where we was at. And that all broke loose and caved in. I don't know how I got up against the face, the solid, but there was a little overhang about that much, the solid, that didn't break off. About 65 ton of rock come down, and I was against that face. It caught my legs, feet, knocked my lamp off, broke my hat. But I was still alive, and I didn't know what happened to the other guys, see? So I listened real close, see if I could hear any rock given higher up, see? And it kept dripping and falling and dripping and falling till this fall of rock was, oh hell, almost as high as that house there. And the entry was about 9 feet wide right there, I guess. And it just come down and filled that all up, but this one little place to go over. And I worked my legs loose and feet, and I listened, and she let up. She kind of eased. I couldn't hear anything. And I made a run for the top of that and hit the top, and I just fell and rolled down the other side. And about, I don't know, maybe 20, 25 cars more give way up there and filled her up right where I just got out of there. Wasn't my time, see, my number wasn't up yet. When I got out, I asked this one fellow, Tony Cruz was his name. I said, "Tony, where's Jim at?" And he said, "Well, Jim went by here running that way." And I went down there and I couldn't find Jim no place. And I come back and I looked all over, and I went to the next, there was a machine working below us, and I went down there and I asked them fellas if they'd seen Jim. No, I didn't see Jim. Said, "What happened?" I said, "The place caved in up there, and I think he's under. I think it caught him." And we started digging him out. I went and got that crew down there, and we loaded that rock out. And they found him along the right-hand wall.
When a miner was killed in one of these mines, either in an explosion or a car got away and he was hit by it, or some other cause, and of course there are all sorts of ways to get yourself maimed or killed in a coal mine, they had a beautiful system. The coroner who owed his office to the coal company would select a coroner's jury, and he would select coal company superintendents and people who were beholden to the coal company to serve on that jury. And invariably, and I use that word advisedly, they found that the miner came to his death through his own negligence. And there was one period in there of, I've forgotten the exact number of years, but 15, 20 years when there was not a single exception to that. All of them died by their own negligence.
There was no job more dangerous than the work of these men. Almost 3,000 miners lost their lives in 1913 alone. But although there had been statewide strikes since 1884, conditions remained much the same. So more miners began to agitate. What they wanted seems now so modest: better safety, an 8-hour day, a check weighman to assure honesty on the scales, and an end to the company store and the tyranny of scrip. The way to get these things, they thought, was to organize, to join up with the United Mine Workers of America. But to talk about it was risky, and actually working as a union organizer could get you beaten or even killed. Some men dared it nonetheless, men like Mike Lavoda. He'd been a union man in Montana. When he came to Colorado in 1910, he worked as what was called an inside man, someone who went into the mines to dig for coal while secretly keeping his eyes and ears open for sympathizers. If he heard miners grumbling about conditions and wishing for a union, he would pass their names on to an outside organizer who would then try to sign up the prospects. Management had its spies too, and Mike Lavoda paid for his efforts with a nighttime beating. He was lucky. Others paid with their lives. But by now, by 1913, the organizers felt strong enough to strike back.
I talked to the fellow that was connected with the union. I said, you think we ought to do something with these men? He said, will you? I said, well, I'll try. And I took the job to organize the miners. And it was dangerous. I got cut one night in the camp. I went in about 7 o'clock and decided to stay over. I used to go in and get out at night. And I decided to stay over to see some men 4 o'clock in the morning before they went into mine. About midnight, here comes the 5 tugs in there, and got me up. And the first thing is the guy hit me, broke my nose. And kicking and hitting my head. They thought possibly that they would, but I was pretty rough myself at that time, you know. And the only thing that they did is broke my nose, but I got it fixed up and paid $75 to get it fixed.
Secret meetings were held in these hills at night. And, of course, as more and more came into the Union, why, the thing became more and more open. The organization of the Southern Colorado Field here didn't happen overnight. It took a matter of many, many months, ran into 2 or 3 years to really get the thing organized to the point where the Union felt that it was strong enough to face the companies. When the strike was called, the unions were prepared to have their people evicted from the coal camps. And in advance, they had purchased tents and stoves and everything to set up tent colonies down on the prairies on free ground that was not company ground. So when the time came, the company did evict them. And the guards came to the houses and they'd throw their beds and everything out into the street and tell them to get moving. And then began the sorrowful processions down these canyons. And it was exodus. Once in the camps, they were organized. They had officers in charge. For example, at Ludlow, the Greek miner, Louis Tikas, they had regular routines set up as to how they would feed, how they wash days, set up very much like an army camp. They had a large recreation tent. They gave concerts to various nationalities. They had their own musical instruments. The men played bocce, the Italian ball game. They played baseball. They had all sorts of things, activities for all ages. Each camp being at the mouth of the canyon where the coal was mined by the company was in itself a picket line. It was an intimidating sort of thing to have these camps with dozens and dozens of tents and thousands of miners and their families in them, blocking, you might say, the entrance to the canyon going up to the mine.
When the miners of southern Colorado voted to strike in September 1913, the operators vowed to run the mines with non-union labor. They had the advantage, actually, because the coal market was in a slump, and with production already cut substantially, the companies could afford a protracted struggle. Neither side budged, and all through one of the worst winters in Colorado history, the strikers held on in their ragged tent colonies. More than once, deep snows collapsed the tents. Then, when the thaws came, the ground turned to mud up to the knees. When the company ordered strike breakers into the mines, the men in the camps resisted, and there were frequent clashes with company guards. The union organized picket marches to try to arouse public support, and parades were held in Trinidad and Denver. Who should turn up at the head of the march than the little woman in the black bonnet, Mary Harris Jones, the legendary Mother Jones. She was 83 years old now. She'd come as a child from Ireland to the United States in 1835. She taught school, married a member of the Iron Molders Union in Tennessee, and after the death of her husband and 4 children in a yellow fever epidemic in Memphis, she had dedicated her life to the labor movement. The industrialists and capitalists of the day never had a more resolute adversary. When she showed up in the earlier coalfield strikes, the miners had called her their angel. Mother Jones said nothing doing. She was there to raise hell. Nothing scared her as long as she could help her boys wherever there was a fight. Well, there was a fight in southern Colorado, and Mother Jones was there.
She was a good fighter for laboring men, and she was fighting for labor all the time with Mother Jones. And, of course, she may have not have done no dirty dishes, but she sure done a lot of good work for the Union.
She was a little woman, very small, and when she made a speech, you could hear her everywhere. Her voice just carried. She had a very strong voice. But sometimes she would condemn the women for not standing back of their men as they should. But a lot of those women were people from the old country, too, and they were not accustomed to going forward with things. There's a hill between Aguilar and Ludlow that we call it Mother Jones Hill. She got up there and made a talk to all of them, and everyone listened to Mother Jones, and she wasn't afraid of the devil. She'd walk right in front of the horses or anything. She never feared. She didn't have any fear for anyone.
I was in Denver, and they had a meeting at the Union Hall in Denver, down on, I forget what street it's on now, a long time ago. Mother Jones was there, and the day before we had this meeting, she wanted them to march on the state capitol to Governor Ammons. They wouldn't do it. And Mother Jones got up and took that little old cape, or she wore a little old black cape, and she took that off, and beat her fist on the desk there, and she said, damn the governor, and damn you, she said. If you'd listened to me, we'd have marched on the Capitol this morning. Tomorrow morning, we're marching. When we started out, there wasn't very many. By the time we got to the state capitol, we were about 500 strong, with a Ludlow flag on one side, an American flag on the other, and Mother Jones in the lead singing Union Forever.
We are going to stay here in southern Colorado until the banner of industrial freedom floats over every coal mine. We are going to stand together and never surrender.
After the rally in Denver, Mother Jones announced that she was returning to the southern coal fields. General Chase of the Colorado militia banned her from Trinidad. She is dangerous because she inflames the minds of the strikers, he said. She scoffed at their fear of an old woman and then slipped into Trinidad at night. But the next morning, she was arrested and held in a hospital room under military guard.
On January 23rd, the women of Los Animas County organized a demonstration and parade in behalf of Mother Jones. Parade permission was obtained from General Chase after great difficulty. The long line of shabbily dressed women and children moved across the picket wire river bridge and up to Trinidad's Commercial Street. 3 blocks east on Main Street, a line of cavalry was drawn across the street. General Chase, mounted on a fine-looking cavalry horse, sat in front of his men, facing the oncoming parade. The head of the parade reached the cavalrymen. Part of the women were making their way between the mounted troopers. Several women gave a triumphant yell. An officer rode up to Chase, but before he could speak, the general's horse became frightened and backed into a parked buggy. General Chase fell off. Red-faced and angry, General Chase climbed stiffly to his feet, yelled at his men, "Ride down the women." The riot aroused the state as nothing had before.
The 1913-14 strike was, in effect, a battle. It was a war. 20,000 rifles were sent, Winchester rifles were sent to Colorado by friends of the miners in Colorado to protect themselves against gun thugs, company guards, state militia. They had actual war in southern Colorado.
They sent a lot of rifles for the strikers from back east, you know.
30-30s.
Yeah, 30-30s.
30.
I help unpack them and everything.
Yeah,
As kids,
yeah,
us kids was into everything, you know. And every time they'd shoot a scabble, we'd run down and see. I've seen some bloody heads and some dead ones.
I saw 3 or 4 men shot right on the Commercial and Main Streets. Oh, yeah. Well, they had some, I think they called it some detective agency from Virginia. They had some of their men in here. And I saw 2 or 3 of their men shot, killed. And, oh, I saw any number of murders around.
The armed guards and the thugs employed by the coal companies were on the streets. They were harassing miners and their families. The CF&I company had gone to Virginia and imported, made a contract for the Baldwin Phelps Detective Agency, which had gone into the slums of New York and Chicago and hired gunmen and thugs, brought them out to Colorado.
Me and George Harmon, I think, was with the first guy that was killed in the Southern Colorado coal strike.
Where was that?
We were going up, we got off the train in Trinidad and walked up to Commercial Street, and we started up Commercial Street, and we got on, going up through there, and a fellow by the name of Lepia, who had come down from Denver. He was an organizer. And 2 fellas walked out with guns out from a pawn shop there. Stepped out with guns and stopped Lepia. But me and George walked on up the street a little. We hadn't walked very far till they started shooting. And they shot Lepia down, and he fell in the middle of the street.
11 days after the strike began, a camp marshal at Segundo was killed in retaliation for a miner who'd been killed earlier in Trinidad. 2 days later began the first phase of the operators' campaign to have the state militia sent to the coal fields.
There was nothing but a bunch of scrums. That's all the militia was, a bunch of scrums to pick up off the streets. They wasn't trained men. Just because they had that uniform on, they thought everybody down there had to recognize the uniform. I got no use for the militia. I never will have. Because one of them hit my dad over the head, and he was walking on the main street in Trinidad. Just walking.
Be walking down the street and somebody step out and shoot somebody just because they were a strike or a militia. And they didn't kill any militiamen as I know of, but they were all, the miners didn't like the militia, of course, because the militia was brought in to protect the CF&I or the property owners, you see.
The militia were intimidating the people of the tent colony. They would ride by on their horses and shout threats and imprecations at them. They would go by in their cars and fire into the tents. And they did such little tricks as getting rusty barbed wire and stuffing it down the wells where the people got their water.
You know, you had to go out to the wells to get your drinking water. You had to carry it in a pail, you know, and she said the militia would sit there and they'd sneak out at night to try to get their drinking water, and they'd shoot holes in their buckets.
Anything went as far as they were concerned if it intimidated the people. This caused the people in the tent colony to dig pits under their tents and then put a flooring over them and a trap door. And whenever they heard shots going through their tents, then they would drop into these pits so that bullets crossing through the colony couldn't hit them. They would be protected.
On March 10, 1914, a non-union miner was found dead on the railroad tracks near the tent colony at Forbes. General Chase, announcing the strikebreaker had been murdered, used the incident as an excuse to totally destroy the Forbes tent colony. 8 miles away, the 1,200 strikers at the Ludlow colony watched the smoke rise from the burning tents at Forbes. Would Ludlow be the next to suffer?
Well, I heard it was going to happen by that railroad man. He told me, he said, there's going to be trouble in Ludlow in the morning. I said, what do you mean trouble? He said, I seen them planting machine guns. It was a moonlight night, see, along the railroad track. Well, the railroad track, if you notice down there, right here, well, that tent colony was right here, see? Right in here, in the railroad track here. He said they was planting machine guns along here.
Suddenly, firing started. It was 10:01 a.m. exactly.
Well, if you hit the rail, glance from the rail, and come back and hit me in the heel. But it just hit me through a heavy part of my shoe, you know, and it stuck right there.
Tychus, he wanted to have them honor the women and children for their safety. And he started over, and he had a white flag on a little stick. And they kept telling him, come on, come on. They talked to him, and he got close enough, they killed him.
And while the men was up along the railroad track and all that, shooting it out with them, well, some of these guys sneaked in with brooms and things flaming, and they set the tent colony on fire.
When they burnt this tent colony, why, these kids, the whole families of them went down in this one place. It was a pretty big cellar, you know. When they come there, started pouring this gas and stuff on these tents, why, these kids and women tried to come up out of there, and they just shoved them back down in there.
And then the floor started burning. The smoke would go down there. So it was forced to come out. When they came out of there, there was women with the children. There was one woman with that 3-4 month baby. There's a goddamn guys that when that woman come out, he used to hear him and with the bite, they kill them all. And one of them baby, he heard him with that, and they hold him up in the air with it. And that was disgrace.
The train man realized what was going on, and that's what saved a lot of women and children. He slowed the train down, you know, just at a slow walking pace. And all these guys, strikers and everything, that followed the train, and that's the way they escaped until they got to one of those ditches, you know. There was a deep ditch there. And they all got in that ditch, and they beat it down to the Black Hills. They call that Black Hills down there.
Now a lot of things happened. Ludlow is still smoking. The rescue teams of the Red Cross people are starting to get in there. And they began to remove the bodies.
We went down the next day. There was nothing but smoke and ruins and old coal stoves, bed springs, bedsteads, and wash tubs and things like that, meager things that they had. It was a miserable, terrible sight. Looked like a graveyard.
I saw the funeral of the Ludlow victims. The little white coffins of the children were put on a large dray pulled by horses, and they were taken to the Holy Trinity Catholic Church in Trinidad for the requiem, and I can see the dray moving to the cemetery. And as the bell was tolled, more than 1,000 fierce-faced men were moving through the hills of Los Animas and Huerfano counties. At one point there, after the massacre at Ludlow, the miners took Trinidad. And my sight, the thing I see, is my father, who was a very young man. He took my mother and me in his car, open car, and he drove proudly around Trinidad. And on each corner, there stood a stalwart miner with his red bandana and his rifle.
You will remember bloody Ludlow as a miner's victory, 'cause they fought back. Yeah, we'll remember bloody Ludlow as a miner's victory, 'cause they fought back. Yeah, we'll remember.
The Union forever.
You
Hurrah,
better believe
boys,
it.
hurrah.
That's right.
Down
Union
with the
forever.
militia.
Yeah.
And up with the law. Can you sing it?
We sang that song until my tonsils hurt.
There were a lot of different versions of that
Just
song.
say
weren't
there was. Yes, there was.
Sometimes there was down with the militia.
Yeah.
To hell with the law.
That's right. That's right. That's
Well,
the
we're
way.
coming, Colorado.
And we're coming all the way.
Shouting
the battle
cry of Union, huh? You remember?
Right. Yeah, I sure remember.
yeah.
I sang
Great-
it and sang
great
it.
days,
and sang
yeah.
it.
53 people were killed in the Ludlow massacre, including 2 women and 11 children. The news spurred an almost universal revulsion toward the mine operators. Unions all over the country sent money, and in some cases guns, to aid the strikers. In their rage at the killing of women and children, the miners attacked and burned company properties up and down Colorado's Front Range. Dozens of mine guards, militia, and strikebreakers were killed in pitched battles. The 10 Days War, as it came to be known, was open-class warfare, and the miners seemed to be winning. The governor of Colorado was forced to appeal to President Woodrow Wilson, who dispatched federal troops to restore peace to the coal fields. Both miners and militia were disarmed by the regular army, and an uneasy truce was imposed. The tent colony at Ludlow was rebuilt. But the Union ran out of funds, and on the 7th of December, 1914, the strike ended with no concessions from the companies. Conditions in the Colorado mines didn't begin to improve very much until many years later, in the 1930s, when the right to collective bargaining was established by law, and the miners voted in the United Mine Workers. It was a long, hard fight for a better way of life, and we forget today how bad conditions were then and how the men and their families struggled to change them. Today, the fires are quenched in the great blast furnaces and open hearths of the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company. The coal mines are closed. Little remains to remind us of those bloody, bitter times, except the ghost town or two and the memories of a few people old enough to remember. Soon, they will be gone too. I'm Bill Moyers.
It's been a long time since I've been home. It's been a long time since I've been home. It's been a long time since I've been home. And I ain't going soon. No, I ain't going back soon. I was born in a coal camp, stars at my head, and mountains as far as I could see. Got to work every day, and I made a big pay. There was honey in the horn for me, and the coal dust blow like a dark summer snow. But I don't hear the roar of the Tybalt anymore, or the whine of the trucks on the line. Now the town's all gone, it's gone away. The town's all gone, it's gone away. Now the town's all gone, it's gone away. The people are straw, the wind has blown away. I was born in the holler that was lonesome and long, and the sun didn't shine all the day. But the banjos in the night and the stars' big light was pleasures that I wanted to stay. How could anybody know that the next year or so we would all be a-wandering over mountain and plain, trying to plant our roots again. It's been a long time since I've been home. It's been a long time since I've been home. It's been a long time since I've been home. And I ain't going soon. No, I ain't going back soon.
Now here are some scenes from our next edition of A Walk Through the 20th Century.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Armstrong included all humanity in his statement. We planted only the American flag, a telling if small detail. From the moon, the earth is but one place. No national boundaries are apparent. We enjoyed that view while it lasted. Back home in the 60s, Earth didn't seem like that at all.
This program has been brought to you by the people of Chevron, who have been helping to supply America's energy needs throughout the 20th century.
Schools, colleges, and other educational organizations may purchase or rent video cassettes of A Walk Through the 20th Century with Bill Moyers by calling 800-424-7963 or by writing PBS Video, Post Office Box 8092, Washington, D.C. 20024.
A teacher viewer guide for this series has been developed by Primetime School Television, a nonprofit educational organization. The guide is available upon request from Chevron by writing A Walk Through the 20th Century with Bill Moyers, 742 Bancroft Way, Berkeley, California, 94710.